Pastor Matthew Stuckey here, and in this video I'm going to explain to you James chapter 2 verse 19 in the Bible. Obviously James chapter 2 is hotly debated, and people will turn here to try to prove that if you have faith you will automatically have good works, but that's not what the passage is teaching, because the Bible actually says you can have faith without works. It says it's dead. It does not say it's going to send you to hell. And so this passage is about being the friend of God, as it says at the end of James chapter 2, because in this life we are justified by our works, not just by our faith. We go to heaven or hell based on what we believe, but whether or not God blesses our life is going to be based on what we do, okay? And so it's important to understand that background, and to understand verse 19, we have to go back to verse number 18, because people that will teach that if you're really saved, you're going to have good works, are going to go to verse 19, where it says, "Thou believest that there is one God, thou doest well, the devils also believe and tremble." And they'll say, well, see, it's not just about believing, but the devils tremble at the judgment of God, because you also have to have the works. But they are pulling that out of context. Now let's go back to verse number 18, and then I'm going to explain to you verse 19. It says in verse 18, "Yea, man may say, Thou hast faith, and I have works. Show me thy faith without thy works, and I will show thee my faith by my works." This verse is not about proving to unsaved people that you're saved. What this verse is about is a hypothetical conversation between two saved people. And one of those people has faith, but they do not have works. They're not really dedicated to church. They're not going soul winning. They're not reading their Bible. But they say that they have faith. And the other one says, hey, well, I have works. It's like, you're telling me how great of a Christian you are. Why don't you come to church? Why don't you come soul winning? The person who says he has works, he's not saying he doesn't have faith. He's saying to the person that says he has faith, why don't you start being dedicated to the things of God? And he says, I will show thee my faith by my works. He's saying, I will show you how much I really care about God by going soul winning and reading the Bible and going to church. Because this passage is about Christians that are actually becoming zealous for the things of God and having works. And so that's the hypothetical conversation. And then we go into verse number 19, and it says, "Thou believest that there is one God. Thou doest well, the devils also believe and tremble." This is not a person saying, hey, you say you have faith, but you don't have works. Look at the devils that are going to go to hell. That's not what's actually being said in this verse. And let me just say this before I go on, that I've preached a whole sermon explaining my interpretation of James 2. There's a lot of interpretations from different good people that could have different opinions. So I'm just taking these verses and quickly explaining. You can listen to the whole sermon to get the context. But in James 2 verse 19, what we have to understand is that the devils and the angels, they don't go to heaven or hell based on what they believe. They go to heaven or hell based on their works, based on their actions. 1/3 of the angels chose to rebel, and they are damned to hell. They have no hope. And so their salvation is not dependent on what they believe. It's based on what they do. And when the Bible says the devils believe that there is one God, well, here's the thing. The devils understand and know who the true God is. Believing in one God does not get you to heaven, but believing in the one true God does get you to heaven. If you put all your faith in the one true God, they know who the one true God is. They understand there's a Trinity, but it doesn't matter, because angels are not judged based on what they believe. They're judged based on what they do. And so the devils, knowing who the true God is, they tremble at the judgment of God. And what this person's saying is, how much more should we as believers tremble at the judgment of God? Because not because we don't know who the true God is, but because we do know who the true God is. Because we understand the true God is going to send unsaved people to hell forever. But we also know that judgment must begin at the house of God. And in this life, you will be justified by your works. And if you live a bad life, God will punish you. So it's not about showing your faith before man or being justified before man. But what it's saying is that if you don't live a good life in this life, you ought to tremble, you ought to fear, you ought to be worried about what God is going to do to you, because God will judge his people. So James 2:19 is not proving that if you're really saved, you're going to have good works. What it's saying is that we as saved people ought to tremble at the judgment of God, not because we don't know who the true God is, but because we know who the one true God is. Anyways, thank you and God bless.